What would you think if I told you that the vacuum of space, that vast and seemingly barren void stretching between the stars, is not empty at all, but is instead a seething ocean of infinite energy? To the modern physicist trained in the rigid structures of general relativity, such a statement might seem archaic, a relic of 19th century thought that was discarded with the arrival of Einstein. Yet, for Nikola Tesla, the man who electrified the world and dreamed of transmitting power without wires, the concept of empty space was a logical fallacy, an impossibility of nature. He firmly believed in the ether, a luminiferous, all-pervading medium that acts as the carrier of electromagnetic waves and the fundamental fabric of reality itself. While history has largely written off the ether as a scientific dead end, a closer examination of Tesla's unfinished theories suggests that he may have been tapping into a deeper understanding of the universe, one where matter is merely slowed down light and where the void itself is alive with vibrations and frequencies waiting to be harnessed. Imagine this. You are standing on the edge of a calm lake. To the naked eye, the water is still, a passive backdrop to the events happening around it. But toss a stone into that water, and suddenly the medium reacts. Ripples expand outward, transferring energy from the point of impact to the farthest shores. Without the water, the stone's energy would have nowhere to go, no medium to carry its disturbance. Tesla viewed the universe in exactly this way. He argued that for light, heat, and radio waves to travel across the cosmos, there must be a medium to facilitate that travel, just as sound needs air and ripples need water. He called this the luminiferous ether. To Tesla, the idea that energy could propagate through a true nothingness was absurd. If space were truly empty, truly void of any substance or property, how could it sustain the electromagnetic fields that bind atoms together or the gravitational forces that keep planets in orbit? There must be a structure, a precursor to matter, a primal substance that fills every nook and cranny of existence, vibrating at frequencies far beyond our perception. This was not merely a philosophical stance for Tesla. It was the bedrock of his engineering. When he spoke of harnessing the wheelwork of nature, he was referring to tapping into the kinetic energy inherent in the ether itself. He conceived of the ether not as a drag on the motion of planets, as earlier physicists had feared, but as a dynamic, fluid-like substance with extremely high electrostatic potential. In his view, all ponderable matter, the stars, the planets, your own body, comes from a primary substance of tenuity beyond conception, filling all space, the akasha or luminiferous ether, which is acted upon by the life-giving prana or creative force, calling into existence in never-ending cycles all things and phenomena. When the prana acts, the ether is thrown into infinitesimal whirls, becoming gross matter. When the force subsides, the motion ceases and matter disappears, reverting to the primary substance. This cyclical view of creation posits that matter is transient, but the medium, the ether, is eternal and boundless. Consider the implications of this worldview on the concept of energy. If space is filled with a medium that possesses physical properties, specifically permittivity and permeability, then empty space is actually a reservoir of untouched power. Tesla's experiments with high-frequency, high-voltage currents were often aimed at interacting with this medium. He observed phenomena that standard theories struggled to explain, such as the generation of longitudinal waves, which he claimed could penetrate matter and travel faster than light, contradicting the transverse wave model of Maxwell and the speed limits later imposed by Einstein. For Tesla, the electromagnetic spectrum we utilize today was just a fraction of the story. He believed that by resonating with the natural frequency of the ether, one could transmit energy instantaneously to any point in the universe with negligible loss. The void was a conductor, not an insulator, provided you knew how to tune your instruments to the symphony of the cosmos. The conflict between Tesla's ether and Einstein's curved spacetime is one of the great schisms in scientific history. When Einstein published his special theory of relativity in 1905, he mathematically removed the need for a fixed ether to explain the speed of light. The scientific community, eager for a unified mathematical framework, largely abandoned the ether. However, Tesla remained an ardent critic of relativity until his death. He famously remarked that relativity is a beggar wrapped in purple whom ignorant people take for a king, arguing that the theory was wrapped in magnificent mathematical garb, which fascinated, dazzled, and made people blind to the underlying errors. Tesla insisted that space cannot have properties like curvature without a physical substrate to be curved. To say that space curves is to treat space as an entity, which brings you right back to the concept of the ether. If space has geometry, if it can bend and warp, it must be something. You cannot curve nothingness. Therefore, even in rejecting the ether, modern physics implicitly admits the existence of a structured vacuum, which is remarkably similar to what Tesla was describing, merely under a different nomenclature like quantum foam or the Higgs field. Let's delve deeper into the mechanics of this universal medium. Tesla conceptualized the ether as an incompressible fluid, vastly denser than the densest matter we know, yet so tenuous that matter moves through it with no resistance, much like a sieve moving through water. This seeming paradox is resolved if you consider vibrations. If the ether vibrates at a frequency infinitely higher than that of atomic matter, then atoms effectively slip through the ether grid. However, if you could stimulate the ether with high-frequency electrostatic forces, you could disturb this equilibrium. Tesla believed that his magnifying transmitter was doing exactly this, pumping the electrical charge of the Earth and the surrounding atmosphere to create standing waves in the medium. He wasn't just sending a radio signal, he was shaking the fabric of space itself. This is why he was so obsessed with resonance. Just as a perfectly timed push can swing a heavy pendulum, perfectly timed electrical pulses could, in theory, cause the ether to yield its latent energy. This brings us to the concept of radiant energy, a term Tesla used frequently. He discovered that when a high-voltage direct current was discharged abruptly in a fraction of a millionth of a second, it produced a stinging ray that behaved differently than standard transverse electromagnetic waves. These impulses, often called longitudinal or scalar waves in fringe science, seem to exhibit a pressure-like quality, moving linearly rather than oscillating side to side. Tesla hypothesized that these were shock waves in the ether, similar to sound waves in air. If you can create a shock wave in the fabric of space, you are tapping into a fundamental mechanism of the universe. This radiant energy could theoretically power the world without burning a single lump of coal. It suggests that the energy crisis is a matter of perspective. We are starving for power while floating in an ocean of infinite energy, simply because we are trying to burn the boat to stay warm instead of hoisting a sail. Understanding the ether also requires us to rethink gravity. Tesla did not accept the idea that gravity was a curvature of space caused by mass. Instead, he hinted at a dynamic theory of gravity related to the absorption and processing of ether by matter. If matter is constantly consuming the ether to maintain its existence, converting the high-frequency energy of the medium into the rotary motion of atoms, then gravity could be the result of the inflow of ether into all material bodies. Imagine a drain in a bathtub. The water flows toward the drain, pulling floating objects with it. If every atom is a tiny drain for the ether, then the force of gravity is simply the pressure of the ether streaming down into the planet. This model unifies electromagnetism and gravity in a mechanical way that relativity fails to do intuitively. It paints a picture of a dynamic, breathing universe where every particle is actively interacting with the space around it, maintaining a delicate balance of inflow and outflow, vibration and stillness. But why does this matter to you? Why should you care about the unfinished theories of a man who died 80 years ago? Because if Tesla was right, even partially, it means the limitations we accept today, limitations of distance, energy scarcity, and propulsion, are artificial. It means that the roadmap to the stars is not through chemical rockets that push against nothing, but through reactionless drives that push against the ether itself. It implies that the human body, which is bioelectrical in nature, is constantly bathing in and interacting with this field. Your thoughts, your heartbeat, the very electrical impulses firing across your synapses might be rippling through this universal medium, connecting you to the cosmos in ways that neuroscience has yet to map. Tesla's vision strips away the isolation of the individual and places us in a continuous matrix of energy. We are not isolated fragments in a dead void. We are focal points of a living, vibrating web. As we analyze the technical aspects of his Wardenclyffe Tower, we begin to see the physical manifestation of these ether theories. The tower wasn't just a big antenna, it was a connection point between the Earth and the ether. Tesla realized that the Earth itself is a conductor, a massive ball of iron and rock floating in the insulating vacuum, or rather, the dielectric ether. By pumping electrons into the Earth at its resonant frequency, he aimed to turn the entire planet into a single electrical oscillator. The standing wave he intended to create would allow anyone anywhere to stick a rod into the ground and tap into the potential difference, receiving unlimited power. This wasn't magic. It was the application of fluid dynamics to electricity, treating the ether and the Earth as parts of a single hydraulic system. The failure of Wardenclyffe due to financial collapse didn't disprove the science. It merely paused the experiment. The equations regarding the impedance of the Earth and the propagation of telluric currents suggest that Tesla had calculated the heartbeat of the planet with frightening precision. To understand the sheer magnitude of what Tesla was proposing with his unfinished theories, we must look beyond the simple transmission of electricity and analyze the fundamental nature of the wave itself. In standard physics, when you switch on a radio transmitter, you are generating Hertzian waves. These are transverse waves, meaning the oscillation occurs perpendicular to the direction of energy transfer, like shaking a rope up and down. The energy radiates outward into space, scattering in all directions, and the intensity drops off according to the inverse square law. By the time the signal reaches a distant receiver, it is a whisper of its former self, requiring amplification to be useful. Tesla viewed this as a wasteful, inefficient leakage of energy. He argued that Hertzian waves were merely the result of surface modulation, a byproduct of the true energy transfer, much like the heat radiating from a light bulb is a byproduct of the light. For Tesla, the real power lay in longitudinal waves, disturbances where the oscillation happens parallel to the direction of propagation, like the compression and rarefaction of sound waves moving through the air. This distinction is not merely semantic, it changes the entire architecture of the universe. If the ether is an incompressible fluid, as Tesla posited, then a longitudinal impulse does not travel in the conventional sense of a particle moving from point A to point B. Instead, it propagates as a pressure front. Imagine a rigid steel rod stretching from Earth to the Sun. If you push one end, the other end moves almost instantaneously. The wave of pressure travels through the medium of the steel. Tesla believed that by generating these scalar or longitudinal waves, he could utilize the ether to bypass the speed of light limitations imposed on transverse waves. Since the ether was theorized to be infinitely rigid, yet fluid, the velocity of a pressure wave through it could theoretically exceed c, the speed of light. This suggests that the universe is interconnected in real time, that the delay we perceive in looking at distant stars is a property of light's transverse struggle through the medium, not the limit of causality itself. Now, consider the source of this energy. Where does the ether get its power? Tesla did not believe that energy could be created or destroyed, but he also rejected the idea of a closed entropic universe that is slowly winding down into heat death. He saw the universe as a self-renewing system. He theorized that the sun and other stars are not merely burning fuel like a campfire, but are actually high-voltage generators, drawing charge from the ether and re-radiating it. In this model, the sun is a node in a galactic circuit, processing the ambient primary energy of the cosmos. This leads to his controversial concept of cosmic rays. Tesla claimed that all matter is constantly being bombarded by ultra-high frequency rays from the cosmos, which he sometimes called primary solar rays. He believed these rays were the true source of radioactive decay. In standard physics, uranium decays because its nucleus is unstable. In Tesla's physics, uranium decays because its molecular structure acts as a target that catches these cosmic rays, shattering under the impact and releasing energy. This externalist view of radioactivity implies that matter is not containing energy, but rather resonating with the energy of the environment. If you accept that matter is reacting to an external field of ether, you inevitably collide with the mystery of gravity. Tesla was working on a dynamic theory of gravity at the time of his death, a theory he claimed to have worked out in all details and hoped to give to the world very soon. Unlike Einstein's general relativity, which describes gravity as the geometric warping of spacetime caused by mass, Tesla's approach was likely mechanical. He criticized the idea that space, a void, could curve. Instead, he likely viewed gravity as a result of the ether's pressure. Picture two metal plates submerged in a turbulent ocean. The waves battering them from the outside push them together because the water between them is calmer, creating a shielding effect. This is similar to the Lesage theory of gravitation, where ultramundane corpuscles, or in Tesla's case, ether pressure or cosmic rays, push bodies toward one another. In this view, you are not being pulled to the earth by its core. You are being pushed down by the weight of the universe above you. The earth blocks the flow of ether from below, creating a pressure differential that pins you to the surface. This mechanical explanation opens the door to antigravity, or more accurately, gravity shielding. If gravity is a push from the ether, then theoretically, one could create a localized field, a high-voltage, high-frequency electromagnetic bubble that redirects the ether flow around an object. If you can shield a craft from the downward pressure of the ether, the craft would become weightless. It would not need rockets to lift off. It would simply cease to participate in the gravitational interplay of the planet. Tesla's reports of his experiments often hinted at this. He spoke of nullifying the weight of objects. This aligns with his broader philosophy. If you understand the mechanism of the medium, you can control the phenomena within it. You do not fight gravity with brute force. You outsmart it by altering the interaction between matter and the ether. The implications of this extend into the very stability of matter itself. Tesla famously stated, "There is no energy in matter other than that received from the environment." This is a profound rejection of the notion of inherent energy. It suggests that atoms are like spinning tops. They only keep spinning because they are constantly being whipped by the etheric wind. If you could shield a region of space entirely from the ether, matter within that region might simply disintegrate or cease to exist as we know it. Conversely, if you could condense the ether, creating a localized vortex of extreme intensity, you could theoretically create matter from nothing. This leads to the concept of the wall of light, a theoretical boundary where the electromagnetic manipulation of the ether becomes so intense that it alters the visibility and temporal properties of objects. While this veers into the realm of the Philadelphia experiment mythology, strictly within Tesla's theoretical framework, the manipulation of light and matter fields to render objects invisible or to displace them is a logical extension of controlling the fundamental fabric of reality. Let's bridge this 19th century ether theory with modern 21st century quantum physics. Today, physicists talk about the zero-point field or the quantum vacuum. They tell us that even at absolute zero, space is seething with virtual particles popping in and out of existence. The Casimir effect, where two uncharged conductive plates are pushed together in a vacuum, proves that there is a force in empty space. This quantum foam is remarkably similar to Tesla's ether. The calculation of the energy density of this vacuum is astronomical. Some estimates suggest that the energy in a single coffee cup of empty space is enough to boil all the oceans on Earth. This is exactly what Tesla was shouting about. He called it the medium. We call it the field. But the conclusion is the same. The void is a battery. We are trying to build fusion reactors to mimic the sun while ignoring the ocean of energy that the sun itself might be swimming in. Tesla's tragedy was not that he was wrong, but that his language, the language of fluid dynamics and mechanics, was superseded by the language of abstract mathematics and relativity. We stopped looking for the gears of the universe because we became obsessed with the curvature of the canvas. Furthermore, Tesla's unfinished work points toward a unified theory of human consciousness and the cosmos. If the brain operates on electrical impulses and the ether is an electrical medium, then the boundary between internal thought and external reality is permeable. Tesla was a man of extreme sensitivity. He could hear thunder hundreds of miles away and visualize inventions in his mind with the clarity of a blueprint. He believed his brain was merely a receiver. My brain is only a receiver. In the universe, there is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration, he said. If the ether is the carrier of all vibrations, then thoughts, which are electromagnetic events, must ripple through this medium. This suggests a scientific basis for collective consciousness or intuition. It implies that information is non-local. When you have a sudden breakthrough, are you generating the idea, or did you just tune your internal receiver to the right frequency to download it from the etheric record? This brings us to the technological suppression, or perhaps the technological incapacity, of his era. To manipulate the ether requires high-voltage, high-frequency engineering that is dangerous and difficult to insulate. Tesla was working with millions of volts. The breakdown of air as an insulator was a constant plague on his experiments. He realized that to truly harness the ether, he needed to go higher, literally. He spoke of utilizing the conductive layers of the upper atmosphere, the ionosphere, to form a global circuit. But more than that, he realized that the material limitations of copper and steel were holding him back. He needed materials that could withstand the stress of resonating with the universe. His death ray, or teleforce weapon, was another application of this. It wasn't a laser. It was a particle beam accelerator that projected microscopic clusters of matter through the medium. By focusing the etheric pressure, he claimed he could bring down fleets of airplanes at a distance of 250 miles. This was not magic. It was the weaponization of the same fluid dynamics he used for power transmission. As we stand in the 21st century, facing energy crises and the limitations of chemical propulsion, Tesla's ether theories offer a tantalizing what if. What if the path to the stars requires us to abandon the rocket equation? What if the solution to clean energy is not in better solar panels, but in a device that taps into the wheelwork of nature itself? The suppression of the ether theory in favor of relativity closed the door on this line of inquiry for a century. Physics became about observation and measurement of effects rather than the engineering of the cause. But as we discovered dark matter and dark energy, which coincidentally make up 95% of the universe, we are essentially admitting that space is filled with something we don't understand, something that governs the motion of galaxies. We have come full circle, reinventing the ether and giving it a new name, terrified to admit that the Serbian electrician might have had the keys to the universe in his pocket all along. To fully grasp the magnitude of Tesla's unfinished symphony of the cosmos, we must return to his most famous axiom. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. This was not a spiritual metaphor for Tesla. It was a literal mechanical instruction manual for manipulating the ether. If the ether is the medium, then vibration is the language it speaks. Every object, every atom, every planet has a resonant frequency, a natural pitch at which it vibrates. Tesla believed that if you could isolate this frequency and amplify it, you could shatter the object or levitate it, regardless of its mass. This is the principle of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse, where a mild wind caused a massive bridge to twist and fail because it hit the bridge's resonant frequency. Now, apply that to the fabric of space itself. If the ether has a resonant frequency, then creating a standing wave at that pitch wouldn't just move energy. It would theoretically allow for the manipulation of the laws of physics themselves. Tesla wasn't just building generators, he was building tuning forks for the universe. This obsession with numerical patterns, specifically 3, 6, and 9, hints at the underlying geometry of this etheric field. Tesla claimed these numbers held the key to the universe. While often dismissed as numerology, from a wave mechanics perspective, this makes perfect sense. In a system of waves, constructive and destructive interference creates nodes and antinodes. The geometry of how energy propagates through a fluid medium is strictly mathematical. If the ether is a fluid, it creates distinct geometric patterns when stressed, vortices, spirals, and rings. Tesla likely saw the grid of the universe not as a random scattering of matter, but as a precise geometric lattice of energy nodes. By tapping into the 9, the point of unity or the axis of the etheric vortex, one could control the 3 and the 6, the oscillation of duality, the positive and negative charges that make up our physical reality. He was looking at the source code while his contemporaries were merely studying the user interface. The tragedy of Tesla's legacy is that his dynamic theory of gravity was never published. Upon his death in 1943, the Office of Alien Property seized his belongings, including roughly 80 trunks of documents and apparatus. While some were eventually released, rumors persist that the papers detailing his gravity theories and the teleforce weapon were classified or lost. Why? Perhaps because the knowledge was too dangerous. If Tesla is correct, and gravity is a manipulation of the etheric density, then a device that creates gravity is also a device that can destroy a planet. A localized disruption of the ether pressure that holds the Earth together could be catastrophic. Furthermore, the economic implications of free energy extracted from the ambient medium would destabilize the global power structure. If every home could have an antenna drawing megawatts of power from the vacuum, the coal, oil, and nuclear industries would collapse overnight. The suppression of the ether theory may not have been purely scientific. It may have been an act of economic preservation. We must also consider the alternative cosmology that emerges from Tesla's work, the electric universe. Modern astrophysics relies heavily on gravity to explain the formation of stars and galaxies. However, gravity is an incredibly weak force. It takes the mass of the entire Earth just to keep a feather on the ground. Electromagnetism is billions of times stronger. If the universe is filled with a conductive ether, then electricity, not gravity, is the dominant sculptor of the cosmos. Tesla's view aligns with the idea that stars are connected by vast invisible filaments of current, Birkeland currents, flowing through the ether. This explains why galaxies spin faster than they should, without needing dark matter, and why nebulae form complex filamentary shapes. In Tesla's universe, we are not isolated islands in the dark. We are glowing nodes in a galactic power grid. The sun acts as a transformer, stepping down the high-voltage galactic current into the light and heat we perceive. This model removes the paradoxes of the Big Bang and suggests an eternal electric universe of infinite cycles, just as Tesla described. Imagine the technology that could have been. If we had spent the last century developing Tesla's ether physics instead of Einstein's relativity, where would we be? We might have flying machines, devoid of wings or propellers, moving silently by manipulating the pressure of the space around them, the very definition of a UFO. We might have global wireless power, where the ionosphere acts as a transmission line, beaming energy to remote villages and bustling cities alike without a single cable. We might have medical devices that heal the body by resetting the vibrational frequency of diseased cells, treating the electrical cause rather than the chemical symptom. We are living in a timeline where we chose the combustion engine over the etheric drive, the chemical rocket over the electromagnetic lifter. We chose the hard way, the explosive way, the inefficient way, because it was easier to monetize and easier to weaponize in the short term. However, science is a self-correcting process, even if the correction takes centuries. We are seeing a resurgence of interest in the quantum vacuum. We are seeing propulsion experiments like the M drive, which appear to violate the laws of conservation of momentum, perhaps because they are pushing against a medium we claim doesn't exist. We are seeing inconsistencies in the standard model that suggest particles are not fundamental, but are excitations of fields. The ghost of the ether is returning. We are beginning to realize that you cannot have a wave without water. You cannot have curvature without a fabric. The terminology is changing. We say dark energy, Higgs field, quantum foam, but the concept remains strictly Teslian. We are describing a universe that is full, dynamic, and fundamental to the existence of matter. Ultimately, Tesla's unfinished theories challenge us to stop looking at the universe as a collection of things and start seeing it as a collection of relationships. The empty space between the electron and the nucleus is not empty. It is the stage upon which the electron dances. The space between the stars is not a void. It is the ocean that supports the archipelago of galaxies. Tesla invites us to step out of the materialist illusion, the idea that only what we can touch is real, and embrace the invisible reality that powers it. He asks us to listen to the silence and realize it is a roar of infinite frequency. He challenges the scientist to become a poet of energy, to understand that the equations are just the sheet music, not the music itself. The question that remains, haunting the halls of modern academia and the secret archives of governments, is whether we are ready for the answer. Are we ready to accept that energy is not a commodity to be burned, but a birthright to be tuned into? Are we mature enough to wield the power of the stars without destroying ourselves? Tesla died alone, penniless, feeding pigeons in a hotel room, regarded by many as a mad scientist. But perhaps his madness was simply the vertigo of a man who looked too deep into the abyss and saw that the abyss was looking back, not with darkness, but with blinding, limitless light. He left us the keys. We have simply been too afraid or too blind to put them in the ignition. So, as you look up at the night sky, do not see a vacuum. See a plenum. See a vibrant, seething ocean of potential that connects you to the furthest quasar. Realize that the separation between you and the cosmos is a trick of the senses, a limitation of your biological receiver. The ether is not a relic of the past. It is the frontier of the future. It is the unfinished business of science. And until we acknowledge the medium that binds us, until we learn to swim in the ocean of energy rather than just floating on the surface, we will remain children playing with sparks in the dark, ignorant of the lightning storm waiting to be unleashed. Is the vacuum of space truly a void, or is it a reservoir of infinite energy waiting for the right frequency to unlock it, rendering our current struggle for resources a tragic misunderstanding of the nature of reality? The universe is not a silent void of non-existence, but a plenum of infinite potential that our current standard model equations simply fail to quantify or acknowledge.